The mystery surrounding Mary Tyler Moore has finally been solved, and it's not good. Her grin has the power to turn the world on, fling her hat in the air with unending hope, and persuade America that she was the epitome of sunshine, self-reliance, and relatable appeal. Mary Tyler Moore has been the epitome of the perfect career lady for many years, talented, kind, and always cheerful, both on and off screen. However, underneath this expertly constructed picture, there was a much more complicated reality that was concealed, one of deep personal suffering. Challenges, as well as a public image that concealed personal suffering. We're investigating the real Mary Tyler Moore today. Narrative that Hollywood cautiously concealed for many years. Revelations that change how we perceive one of the most adored icons on television. From terrible losses to covert struggles with addiction. From initial tensions to these 5 facets of Moore's life. Network conflicts show a lady very different from the upbeat persona who shaped her public persona. Not only is a more complex portrayal of a renowned actress revealed, but an unsettling look at how completely Hollywood can distort and sanitize reality to keep it marketable. Myths surrounding its most prominent stars. Mary Tyler Moore's truth isn't all negative. It's distant, complex, and human, more captivating than the one-dimensional perfection that was marketed to us for many years. The distance between the public and Mary Tyler Moore. One of Hollywood's most effective image control strategies is image and private reality. As viewers observed a professional woman who made it and was always happy and composed. Following the real Mary Tyler Moore overcame severe personal catastrophes, battled secret demons, and fought conflicts behind the scenes that were mostly hidden from her admiring fans. By looking at 5 significant facets of Moore's life and work that were purposefully downplayed or hidden, we can at last recognize this television icon's complete depth. A woman whose true tale is much more hardship, suffering, and tenacity than her meticulously manicured persona ever implied. Let's find out what Mary Tyler Moore really is. Disclosures that emphasize rather than downplay her accomplishments, the incredible fortitude needed to launch her illustrious career while bearing the responsibilities that few fans ever suspected. Essentially, it reads as amazing, captivating drama. After that, you get up in the sorrow of her son's passing and the issues it brought up. Since October 14, 1980, Mary Tyler Moore has been Richard Mayer Jr., her only child, passed away from self-inflicted suicide in the height of her notoriety and power in Hollywood, head wound from a bullet. He was only 24. Moore would be plagued by this terrible loss for the rest of her life, impacting everything from her career decisions to her interpersonal interactions. However, her complicated relationship with her son and the circumstances surrounding his death were not widely discussed in the public discussion on her legacy. Moore's first marriage produced a son, whom family and friends called Richie. When Moore was just 18, he joined forces with Richard Mayer, Sr. Born Richie grew up during his mother's ascent to fame on television when Moore was just 19 years old. Initially as Laura Petrie on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and then on the Mary Tyler Moore Show as the legendary Mary Richards. Although Moore has publicly kept up the appearance of a loving mother who managed her work and family obligations, but in actuality, she was far more intricate. In her memoirs, Moore subsequently acknowledged, after all, her rigorous work schedule and she was frequently gone throughout Richie's early years due to her concentrate on her developing business. I wasn't the best mother, she wrote with her usual candor. I tended to put more since I was so focused on becoming a good actress, or more focus on my career than I ought to have. Unusual for a female celebrity of her time. Her revelation alluded to the complicated characteristics that defined their connection during the course of Richie's existence. When Richie reached puberty, according to reports, the relationship grew more rocky. Several people close to the family claimed that had battled with his identity as a well-known mother's son. Torn between pride in her achievements and bitterness towards her absences and the ongoing attention from the public. Richie spent much of his adolescent years living with his father after Moore married television executive Grant Tinker after divorcing Miker Sr. Richie had experienced his own difficulties in his early 20s, including what some reports characterize as times off drug misuse and trouble identifying a clear career path. Although Moore never described these difficulties in public, later in life, She would admit that her son had experienced the typical challenges of maturing, a euphemistic allusion to issues that were probably more significant than this description indicated. Though the facts behind Richie's passing remained tragic and somewhat unclear. Accidental death was the official ruling. Investigators came to the conclusion that he was playing with a shotgun that was part of his own collection when it went off, surprisingly. But as Moore would subsequently inquire in private discussions with close friends, there were unsettling elements of the event that were never entirely consistent with the accident story. The firearm in question was a snake charmer, a soft shotgun variant that was compact and concealable, a weapon intended more for self-defense than for sporting shooting. There were inquiries as to why Richie would having been using this specific weapon. Why was it loaded in his residence on the university's campus, at his school in Southern California, and how someone who was accustomed to handling firearms could have had such a tragic mishap involving a weapon that has been cleaned and maintained. A gun killed America's sweetheart's only child. She never entirely recovered, noted Moore's lifelong friend, who saw her anguish in the years that followed, the death of Richie. This evaluation effectively conveys the devastating effects of this loss on Moore's life, a tragedy from which she, despite her ongoing career success and poise in public, she never entirely recovered. The most moving feature of Moore's personal way of expressing her shame about her relationship with Richie was through this tragedy. As stated by, she tormented herself by wondering if she had been enough present as a member of her inner group, the mother, if her professional obligations had hampered his growth, and if more careful parenting could have prevented the events that resulted in his death in some way. In her autobiography published in 1995, Moore discussed, "There is no question about it. By the time Richie was 5, I had already let him down." The author wrote, addressing this guilt head-on, "I was busier and more self-centered than I had been when he was impressionable, just when he needed me the most infant." A major celebrity's uncommon public admission of parental regret provided insight into the inner turmoil that had surrounded Moore's seemingly prosperous life. What's really noteworthy about Moore's story is how completely it was downplayed in the public account of her life during the height of her success, whereas Mary Richards, her comedy character, was portrayed as the real Mary Tyler Moore was a self-reliant professional lady who chose to be childless and single, overcoming the difficult obstacles of juggling ambition with motherhood, and then dealing with the loss of her lone child in situations that prompted unsettling inquiries. The sharp contrast between Moore's cheerful public image and the personal suffering she went through after Richie passed away is among the most significant discrepancies in Hollywood history between the public perception of celebrities and their actual lives. Although viewers continued to Moore was personally crushed by a loss, but people tend to link her with the positive, capable attitude of her television characters, which she would never fully recover from, a tragedy that profoundly influenced her subsequent life and career in ways her audience never understood her completely. You see, I consider cooking to be a type of art, and someone's idea after you've put all of your imagination into it. 2. Her career was almost ruined by her covert drinking. The character Moore was playing was the composed professional Mary Richards, who drank only sometimes a bottle of wine. The actress herself was battling alcoholism in private, endangering both her health and her career. This struggle with addiction started when she was on the Dick Van Dyke show and got worse over time. That was kept out of the public eye during the 1970s until Moore herself decided to disclose it in her 1995 autobiography. In the end, Moore's drinking seems to have been stemming from her own insecurities as well as the tremendous responsibilities of upholding her public character. Started drinking to help her deal with the stress of maintaining the ideal, wholesome image she had portrayed on film. She later said, "Drank to numb the loneliness," explaining how the contrast between her self-assured public persona and her alcohol momentarily eased the emotional strain caused by personal self-doubt during the Mary from 1970 until 1977. She mostly refrained from drinking on the Tyler Moore Show after hours, but some co-workers started to notice alarming trends. Several crew members who Moore occasionally showed up on Monday mornings while working on the series, displaying faint indications of the weekend drinking, slightly swollen eyes, or slight memory problems with lines that would not have been difficult otherwise for her renownedly accurate performance manner. Although she made it appear effortless, she was collapsing backstage, that recounted a producer who collaborated closely with Moore during this time. Highlighting the remarkable Moore maintained her professional discipline, which enabled her to give faultless performances in private, battling a growing addiction that was starting to interfere with her life away from the camera. By the late 1970s, when the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended its prosperous run, Moore's drinking had gotten so bad that it started impacting her relationships and health. During this time, Moore's close friends have reported how she would frequently start early afternoon drinking followed by evening consumption was a particularly troublesome pattern when she wasn't working on a production and the schedule demands that came with it. The most Moore experienced multiple personal difficulties during a severe phase of her drinking, including the breakdown of her marriage to Grant Tinker, her son Richie's untimely death, and a string of career setbacks as she searched for prosperous endeavors after her renowned sitcom. This ideal combination of personal and work-related difficulties caused her to drink excessively, ultimately resulting in a health crisis that required Moore checked herself into the Betty Ford Center for Treatment in 1984 when she decided to face her addiction. It followed what she subsequently called hitting bottom, when she realized her drinking was endangering not just herself, profession, but her survival itself. This hospitalization was a watershed, yet she would recover in a lengthy procedure as opposed to a quick change. What makes Moore's battle with alcoholism unique? The fact that it was effectively hidden from the public during the peak of her career is especially noteworthy. While the substance misuse issues of other celebrities around that time period were the subject of tabloids, Moore's meticulous preserved her public persona, and the supportive network of friends and co-workers surrounding her helped keep her addiction mostly kept under wraps until she decided to come clean years later, a decision made possible by both the distinct media landscape of that age and the television industry's need to safeguard a prized celebrity, in the absence of the ubiquitous paparazzi and social media records of today. Celebrities in the 1970s had more solitude to handle private matters out of the public eye. Network executives, producers, and even other cast members were highly motivated to uphold Moore's impeccable public image, both financially and professionally. Despite her personal hardships, Moore's autobiography was the first to openly discuss her alcoholism. In follow-up interviews, she brought the same decency and courage that had defined her to the disclosure. Professional work. Instead of making excuses or downplaying her actions, she recognized the severity of her dependency and the damage it had done to her and others around her. This candor, from a celebrity who had it, was unexpected and impactful that she was so strongly linked to perfection. "I am not a victim," she said. Wrote, "No one poured alcohol into me and held me down. Despite my illness, the choice to drink was the decision to end was also mine." Moore's resolute refusal to avoid personal responsibility was evident in this remark. Blame, despite admitting that addiction is a medical condition. Moore's subsequent disclosure of her alcoholism helped change how the general public, especially women, views addiction. As one of the first female celebrities offer ability to openly discuss substance misuse, she contributed to lessening the stigma attached to addiction and recovery, particularly for women like her who may seem to have it on the outside. Things together while privately experiencing difficulties. The contrast between Moore's flawlessly manicured public image and Hera's significant irony in her life narrative is her private struggle with alcoholism. The woman who created the most well-known portrayal of the capable, well-rounded professional woman on television was actually battling a dependency that jeopardized that precise balance and expertise. This inconsistency doesn't lessen her accomplishments, but rather demonstrates the incredible self-control needed to keep up her career while battling a condition that has interrupted. He is sensible about it. No, 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 no. They treat you like adults, so you have the freedom to decide what you want to do. Innumerable Lives 3, her actual coldness and alienation from co-stars. This is possibly the most striking difference between Mary Tyler and Moore's amiable on-screen demeanor and her private life were very different from one another. Spectators fell in love with what they reported as a much cooler, more dominant presence behind the scenes. Because of Mary Richards' contagious friendliness and Laura Petrie's emotional transparency, those who worked directly with Moore frequently came across a woman who tightly controlled her image and kept a careful emotional distance. This discrepancy initially emerged during the Dick Van Dyke show, where Moore's professional her attention to detail and concentration occasionally caused a gap with the more casual improvisational style off co-stars like Dick Van DJK and Maury Amsterdam, without ever engaging in direct confrontation. Occasionally, the comfortable relationship viewers witnessed on film was belied by the subtle tension caused by working approaches that Moore's professional manner had changed by the time she started her own program in 1970, and members of the cast and crew were characterized as having a pleasant but distinct distance. In contrast to Mary Richards's personality, which developed, the real Moore maintained more formal friendships with her co-workers at WJM-TV, that relationships with the majority of her co-stars, friendly and courteous, but infrequently growing into intimate personal ties. Given the show's portrayal of professional camaraderie, viewers might have anticipated that she would smile on camera. One writer who worked on the Mary Tyler Moore program said, "She ran a tight ship and cut deep when crossed." Moore's split personality was encapsulated in this assessment during its latter seasons. The friendly, captivating performer who could immediately establish a connection with viewers via the camera, and the more reticent, occasionally frightening professional who used caution when interacting with others. This is possibly the most illuminating evaluation that originated with Betty White, who portrayed the show's man-hungry, content housewife Sue in Vin. Years later, White she was not as warm as people believed, but she was intelligent enough to observe with her unique candor a fake it. This statement from White, who is renowned for her sincere kindness both on and off camera, offered specific understanding of the disparity between Moore's private and public lives. Moore's domineering inclinations extended transcend interpersonal relationships to have a major say in production choices. As the co-owner and star, Moore's show was produced by MTM Enterprises, with her then-husband Grant Tinker exercising considerable control. For an actress of the time, she was heavily involved in casting choices, scripts, and even technical details, such as camera angles and lighting that are normally beyond the control of a performer, which sometimes resulted into disputes with producers and writers who had to deal with more than simply the typical difficulties of television production, as well as the extra dimension of Moore's precise requirements and distinct vision for her role. Moore would turn down plots or speech that she felt were inappropriate, according to several show writers, that conflicted with her perception of Mary Richards or could jeopardize the meticulously cultivated public persona she had grown. Moore and Valerie Harper experienced one of the more notable behind-the-scenes conflicts, which played Roa Morgenstern, her best friend in the series. Although their chemistry on film showed a close connection, according to reports, their connection off-camp was more complex. As Harper's persona gained popularity, finally, according to people close to the production, Moore appeared to be growing more worried, which led to the spin-off series Roa, that regarding being overshadowed. This may have been a natural insecurity, but it caused the two actresses to become distant from one another, even though they respected one another professionally. Moore's interactions with male co-stars include Edner, who portrayed her, both Ted Knight, who played the cheesy anchor Ted Baxter, and boss Lou Grant were friendly, but measured. Although she continued to show professional regard for their abilities, the loving care that typified Asner in particular has stated in interviews that their on-screen relationships seldom ever lasted outside of the set. Despite their years of productive collaboration, he and Moore never became close friends. Given the relationships between its characters, viewers may have inferred that these interpersonal interactions, it's not that they were particularly controversial by Hollywood standards. In fact, a lot of popular shows have been created in the midst of much more intense strife. Instead, their importance comes from how drastically they ran counter to the general belief that Moore was the epitome of the kind, approachable persona she played. Moore was aware of this conflict and showed a great deal of self-awareness regarding the difference between her public persona and private personality. She recognized in her book that she tended to be emotionally reserved, stating, "I'm not as gregarious in person as people may assume based on my TV persona. I'm not extroverted by nature, and I'm still working on honing my social style." This uncommon acknowledgement from a well-known celebrity provides insight into the psychological intricacy of keeping a public image that differs greatly from one's innate disposition. A problem that probably added to the personal stressors that drove her drinking and her high standards as a professional. The work necessary to convey the kindness and candor that made Mary, even though Moore didn't inherently possess these traits, Richards' popularity signified a performance that extended considerably beyond the needs of the screenplay and the filming schedule. So what took place? What you were aware of when I was growing up, and you knew that a Ford was a Ford. 4. Being too political for her own show was the first accusation made against a TV actress. Even though the Mary Tyler Moore Show is now hailed as a revolutionary feminist television achievement, the actuality of its creation shows a persistent conflict between Moore's network and progressive vision, that opposition to material that is thought to be too contentious for the general public. This internal conflict over the political ramifications of the program, especially with relation to women's evolving positions in society, reflect an important yet mostly ignored part of Moore's career and the history of television. Since its establishment, the Mary Tyler Moore for television in the early 1970s, the show included elements that were subtly new. The main character in it was a single lady in her 30s prioritized her job over finding a husband, a drastic change from the way sitcoms have traditionally presented women. Mary Richards was in a financial independent, sexually liberated, but in a way that was considered tasteful at the time and mostly defined by her career goals as opposed to her sexual interactions. The ongoing negotiating was something that spectators missed, that necessary to uphold these progressive aspects while appeasing network executives who were worried about offending commercials and general audiences. As reported by the series creators and producers, Moore regularly pushed for narratives that would push the boundaries of social issues, workplace equality, and women's freedom, frequently encountering opposition that necessitated giving in or dropping bolder ideas. They instructed her to spin, grin, to be nice, and she declined, according to a writer who contributed to the show in its early seasons. This finding encapsulates the core conflict at the center of the series. Moore's commitment to developing a character with real complexity and agency, in contrast to the network's inclination for a more conventionally appealing, less tough female lead. The way the show treated Mary was one of the biggest internal conflicts that Richards' sexual activities. Moore and a few of the authors wished to make it clearer that Mary was sexually vibrant, realistic depiction of a 30-year-old unmarried lady in the early 1970s, when social conventions had already been altered by the sexual revolution. CBS executives vehemently objected, stating that although Mary was free to date, any suggestion of sexual activity have to stay very subdued to prevent offending advertisers and conservative viewers. This led to the show finally adopted a well-calculated strategy. It's obvious that Mary dated and occasionally hosted guys for the night, but more conservative viewers were able to retain plausible deniability because these elements were handled so delicately. About what was really happening. This arrangement demonstrated the difficult compromise Moore was trying to navigate, developing a persona that was representative of actual women's experiences while also being acceptable to network television's more stringent requirements. On the show, similar conflicts emerged around workplace relations. Moore favored narratives that specifically addressed sexual harassment, wage disparity, and gender discrimination, issues that were gaining prominence in the 1970s feminist movement, but continuing to be quite divisive among the general public media. These more overtly political plots were usually resisted by network executives, who claimed that character humor, not societal critique, should be the show's main focus. In one especially illuminating instance, Moore suggested a plot in which Mary would find out she was paid less than a male co-worker with comparable duties, an outspoken critique of the gender pay disparity. Production memos from the time period indicate that CBS executives rejected this idea, arguing that it was too assertive and that Mary would appear to be a women's liberator. Instead, they wanted her to be a relatable representation of every mother. Moore's reaction to this persistent opposition was strategic as opposed to aggressive. Instead of battling the network in public, which may have threatened the show's survival, she worked within the framework to include progressive components in more subdued methods. By using this strategy, the Mary Tyler Moore Show was able to promote feminist concepts through situational humor and character development as opposed to overt political declarations. She later claimed that one producer had advised her, "Don't make Mary too independent," very closely with Moore. Network executives' primary worry was encapsulated in this directive that an overly autonomous, forceful, or political female character could turn off the popular audience required for rating success. Moore's brilliance was realizing that she could grow her vision more successfully through gradual adjustments as opposed to outright conflict. The concessions are more free of personal expense. Those who knew her during this time said that she occasionally voiced annoyance with the limitations imposed on the show's plot and the growth of her character. This conflict between the tamed version that was seen on screen and her more progressive personal opinions contributed to the stress that made her drink more and caused her private and public selves to diverge. What makes this element of Moore's career is especially noteworthy since it anticipated discussions on politics and representation in entertainment that is still going strong today. She was criticized for being overly political, even though her views were articulated using comparatively subtle character choices as opposed to overt declarations, created a pattern that would recur for decades as television gradually broadened its representation of social problems, minorities, and women. In this way, Moore's unacknowledged but significant legacy is her lobbying work behind the scenes. Later television feminist superstars may have made more overtly political remarks in public, but Moore was at the forefront of the delicate art of promoting progressive ideas while staying within the bounds of popular entertainment, paving the way for the more overtly political material that would emerge in the decades that followed. 5. The union that destroyed her and the subsequent rumors. The second marriage of television executive Grant and Mary Tyler Moore Tinker was a source of great personal difficulty as well as the pinnacle of her career achievement. As the power duo behind MTM Enterprises, the production business in charge of not just the Mary Tyler Moore Show, but also several other popular television shows from the 1970s, such as Lou Grant, Roa, and The Bob Newhart Show. Tinker and Moore established one of the most prosperous and significant entertainment conglomerates of their time. However, beneath this apparent, a marriage characterized by emotional distance, conflicting goals, and eventually a perfect professional partnership, Moore's heartbreak was profound. Tinker and Moore first crossed paths at CBS. As the rising star of he worked as an advertising executive before becoming a network programming personality for the Dick Van Dyke Show. Executive. After Moore's divorce from her first husband, Richard Mayer, they were married in 1962, and it appeared that their union would provide both individual fulfillment and career benefit, a combination of skill and commercial sense that would prove incredibly profitable for both sides. MTM Enterprises' establishment in 1969 solidified its standing as the most powerful duo on television. The mewing kitten in the MTM emblem, which bears Moore's name, was a purposeful satire of the roaring lion of MGM. The business embodied a novel approach to television production that provided innovative abilities to successfully function within the commercial network system while having previously unheard of control over their work. Compared to most television shows, Moore was able to maintain more control over her image and show thanks to this business structure. Stars of the time could only hope for success. However, many close to the pair claim that the couple's career success off MTM concealed a rising sense of alienation. Tinker, although encouraging Moore's career, upheld a more conventional marriage philosophy that occasionally conflicted with Moore's more autonomous and feminist viewpoints. According to one of the couple's friends, they established an empire and smothered one another beneath it. The underlying irony of their connection is captured in this observation, producing television that navigated the challenges that women's independence caused while celebrating their independence within their own union. Rumors of marital discord had started to circulate in Hollywood circles by the middle of the 1970s. Tinker's rigorous work schedule, which frequently required him to spend a lot of time away from their house, caused both physical and emotional detachment. Moore, on the other hand, was coping with her growing alcoholism and the continuous strain of upholding her public persona while battling personal issues. Persistently harmful were reports of adultery. In contrast to many Hollywood marriages, however, the rumors were more emotional than physical. Affairs. It has been suggested by colleagues from this era that Moore and Tinker became close with people that, even if they weren't sexually completed, gave them the emotional bond they needed. Union. According to reports, these connections increased stress in a union that was already tense due to professional pressures and individual variances. When the marriage finally ended in 1981, the most agonizing part was how it completely upended Moore's meticulously crafted autobiography. Having established her public persona and trademark televised character centered on the concept of the strong, self-assured modern woman, and her marriage to Tinker's failure prompted Moore to face difficult inquiries regarding the discrepancy between her personal fulfillment and career success. Inquiries that allegedly exacerbated a severe depressive episode after their split. This time frame corresponded with the terrible passing of her son Richie, which led to what Moore subsequently called the worst time of my life. The mix of personal sorrow, the passing of her only child, and the change in her career as her renowned program ended child, and her marriage's dissolution created a perfect storm of mental difficulties that already drove her problems drinking to the point of danger. Following the divorce, Moore's unexpected fragility in spite of her tough and resilient public persona. Those close to her at the time said that she saw the split as a severe rejection that affected her feeling of value in ways that her prior divorce hadn't. While Tinker proceeded somewhat easily, rapidly establishing himself as Moore, the president of NBC, found it difficult to establish herself on a personal and professional level. This challenging their divorce's financial arrangements made the transition more difficult. Moore kept a sizable amount of his assets. However, Tinker continued to be in charge of MTM Enterprises, the business that bore her initials and was mostly established on her ability. Moore had an additional layer of loss as a result of this business split, feeling alienated, leaving the production firm that had shaped a large portion of her career for more than 10 years. The agonizing Moore and those around her saw the irony of this circumstance. The actress who has played the most well-known character on television, the self-reliant female character, had based her actual production business on her husband's business acumen rather than opposed to keeping autonomous control. After the marriage collapsed, this choice gave her less control over, in sharp contrast to the professional independence her character Mary possessed. The very entertainment empire she had helped build, Richards had taken up the role. In the years that followed, Moore would reconstruct her personal life and ultimately discover enduring contentment in her third marriage to Robert Levine and her professional life via well-selected initiatives and advocacy labor. However, the dissolution of her marriage to Tinker left her with emotional wounds that never completely healed, leaving a lasting melancholy that friends noticed even in her later, better years. Why is this feature of Moore's tale is especially important? Because it exposes the complex reality that underlies her innovative depiction of women. Autonomy. Moore herself was developing a character that encouraged millions of women to follow their own dreams, but was negotiating the far more complex reality of striking a balance between career aspirations and interpersonal interactions, frequently committing the same agonizing concessions and errors that her character Mary Richards appeared to surpass. The Woman Who Smiled. As we combine the 5 facets of Mary Tyler Moore's secret story, a much more nuanced picture is revealed than the one-dimensional perfection that is typically discussed out of her heritage. The Woman Whose Smile Made the World Turn On was also dealing with severe grief over the passing of her son, fighting alcoholism, which endangered her work and health, and preserving emotional distance from individuals in her immediate vicinity while displaying warmth on film, engaging in backstage conflicts for more progressive material, and persevering through a marriage that finally fell apart due to conflicting goals and emotional detachment. This broader perspective on Moore does not lessen her accomplishments, but rather demonstrates the incredible fortitude needed to launch her illustrious career while bearing the responsibilities that few fans ever suspected. The contrast between her upbeat public persona and her more nuanced private life does not indicate hypocrisy, but the high price of upholding the ideal image that networks and viewers required, particularly from women inside the entertainment sector. Above all, realizing Moore's life's complete complexity changes our comprehension of her most well-known persona. Mary Richards was a projection of reality rather than merely a work of fiction that Moore's personal goals, an idealized representation of female competence and independence that she found difficult to achieve represent in her everyday life. The optimism that endeared the character was a reflection of Moore's own will to, despite personal losses that could have devastated someone with less inner strength, keep going. The ideal, always happy woman who threw her hat in the air with reckless abandon wasn't the real Mary Tyler Moore. Give up. She was far more intriguing. A complicated, imperfect person who made a famous television character while engaging in personal conflicts that most individuals would have found too much to handle. Her most notable accomplishment wasn't projecting perfection, while overcoming significant personal obstacles to produce work that altered how America considered the potential of women. Knowing the whole truth about her life, including the public victories and their own hardships, we can admire not just her skill, but also her remarkable bravery in continuing to inspire others. Grin, despite the fact that she had many reasons not to.